I'd like to now just take a minute or two to introduce our keynote speaker before we move on to lunch. Ms. O'Sullivan was sworn in as the Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence on February 28, 2011. She currently serves in a role similar to that of a Chief Operating Officer, where she focuses on the operations of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence and manages the intelligence community coordination and information sharing. She also reinforces the DNI's intelligence integration initiatives and focus on the intelligence community resource challenges. Before this assignment, she served as the Associate Deputy Director of the Central Intelligence Agency since December 2009, where she worked with the Director and Deputy Director in the overall leadership of the agency, with emphasis on the day-to-day management of the organization. Prior to becoming Associate Deputy Director of CIA, Ms. O'Sullivan spent 4 years leading the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology, the part of the agency responsible for developing and deploying innovative technology in support of the intelligence collection and analysis mission. Before welcoming him to the stage, I'd like to also let you know that because I need to get you all to lunch in time, I've asked Ms. Sullivan's gracious patience in allowing us to cut things a little short, so she'll have enough time to deliver her full comments to us, but unfortunately I'm gonna rush everybody over and we won't have time for extended Q&A on this one. But I'd like to welcome her to the podium. Thank you.
So thank you for having me out to speak. It's an honor to be here representing the intelligence community and the Director of National Intelligence. From where I'm standing, I really can't tell who's in the audience this morning. I know there's at least one student, from an officer from our National Counterterrorism Center, who has a promising and interesting career ahead of her. But I hope that there are many other students out there, because I want to commend you for participating in this conference and encourage you to pursue a career in public service. Whether you serve in the Peace Corps or in the military, or make navigation maps or teach as my parents did, public service gives you a chance to be part of something that is wider meaning, to connect with something beyond a paycheck. Public service can turn a job into a career and infuse your work with a sense of purpose. 3 decades ago, when I was new to the intelligence community, I don't think this is something that I could have imagined myself doing. When I started out in the IC, I literally did not know what to expect. After college, as a freshly minted engineer, I left the Midwest for the more exciting and professionally promising East Coast. I didn't have much money or any income, so my parents let me stay with them on their live-aboard boat in Annapolis while I looked for a job. It's a good plan. I saw an ad for an ocean engineer at TRW, the company that was later bought by Northrop Grumman. The ad was remarkably short on any details, but I thought, I'm an engineer and I live on a boat, so I've got this ocean engineering thing covered. And that's how my career in the IC started, as an engineer designing high-tech and highly classified systems for the Navy. After several years, I moved from TRW to take a job as a government employee, following my parents' footsteps into public service. And then years later, when I moved to CIA, my first boss made me a promise. He said that I would never be bored. I would experience every other emotion, but I'd never be bored. That promise held true. At CIA, we built some amazing technologies and participated in critical missions. And over the course of my career, I went from building technology systems to building small teams who built technology systems and building much larger organizations at CIA and now at ODNI. A little more than 4 years ago, I accepted Jim Clapper's offer to be his Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence. That's PDD&I. It's a mouthful, so I just shortened it to P. Diddy. Director Clapper likes to point out that technically, I've held the title P. Diddy longer than Sean Combs did. The Office of the DNI has its roots with the start as shortfalls perceived by the 9/11 Commission, that intelligence agencies weren't sharing information with each other and we're incapable of acting jointly. So precisely 10 years ago this past Wednesday, the first DNI was sworn in, and the Office of the DNI, or the ODNI, was launched. The DNI is the President's senior intelligence advisor and is also responsible for the national intelligence budget. But I believe the third duty of the DNI is the most critical, which is bridging that joint action gap that the 9/11 Commission identified. And that responsibility goes way, way beyond just getting the intelligence agencies to talk to each other. It's about helping them to recognize the cultural strengths and capabilities of each of the 17 elements of the intelligence community and bring them to the table, and then getting them to think as a community. It's about creating a culture of integration, making it second nature to bring our best and most experienced and capable community resources to bear against our toughest national security problems. Intelligence integration is the prerequisite for reaching the 9/11 Commission's goal that we act as a community. For me, after 30 years of work at TRW, with the Office of Naval Intelligence and in CIA, I saw just how important it was that we get this right. So I jumped at the chance to be at the center of that work and to work for Jim Clapper. He is probably the most selfless leader that I've ever worked with, and I've worked with some real legends. That's a somewhat unique path that I've taken to be standing here today. So, just to be clear and to set expectations, I need to make one point about the 3.5 decades of work that I just covered. I've worked on the design and deployment of some pretty amazing systems and led teams that put incredible technology into operations. But at no point was I ever a cyber expert. We have a lot of cyber experts in the IC and in government. The NSA and FBI have been developing cyber expertise for decades. The Secret Service has a statutory mandate for cyber law enforcement and have held it since the government first got into the business. There are other experts at DHS and CIA and scattered throughout the intelligence community. NSA Director Admiral Mark Rogers will be here this afternoon, and he's a lot more qualified to talk about the intricacies of cyber defense and cyber ops. So what I want to talk about is how the IC integrates intelligence and how that relates to the ways that we need to tackle the cyber intelligence challenge. The most obvious way that we integrate intelligence is through joint agency intelligence reports. Since the premiere of State of Affairs last fall, a much larger portion of the community, or the country, knows about our premier report, the President's Daily Brief. And I'm here to tell you it happens just like on State of Affairs, except that the staff who puts together the PDB spends more time worrying about content and about being precise and concise with language that is going to the busiest man in the world, and less time rescuing hostages from Boko Haram. That, and the briefers assure me that no one has the time or energy to hang out at the bar until it's time to go to work. If you throw in the fact that neither Jim Clapper nor anyone else on the DNI briefing rotation looks anything like Katherine Heigl, you've got an indication of just how far popular perceptions and the realities of the intelligence business can be. For longer term, bigger, more public products, our National Intelligence Council produces national intelligence estimates and writes our annual worldwide threat assessment, which the DNI presents every spring, testifying in open sessions to our various congressional oversight committees about our assessments of the worldwide threats. Director Clapper says that talking to Congress in the open about classified matters while trying to protect intelligence sources is one of his favorite things to do. Right up there with getting a root canal or folding fitted sheets, which I'm pretty darn sure he's never done. But we do it every February and March because it's important to our congressional leaders and the American public to hear from the DNI and the intelligence community. And it's important for us to be transparent as possible, sharing as much unclassified detail as we possibly can. Each year, cyber has been an increasingly prominent threat. And for each of the past 3 years, cyber bumped terrorism off the top of our list of national security threats. To be clear, cyber doesn't lead our threat report because of the remote but real potential of a large-scale attack, a cyber Armageddon that debilitates the entire US infrastructure. It leads because our reality, right now, and for some time, has been that we are living with a constant barrage of low to mid-level cyber attacks that are hugely damaging to our economy and to our national security. China, in particular, has been harvesting large volumes of intellectual property that is key to our economic competitiveness. China's primary motivation is probably to catch up and then surpass Western industrial and defense capabilities, and to eventually pass by the US economy. In national defense, few things turn heads like seeing your aviation system flying over the skies of a foreign nation with a different flag on its tail, or finding that an adversary is already working to counter your expensive cutting-edge capabilities that haven't been deployed yet. And in the private sector, there are few things more dispiriting to corporate health and morale and corporate wealth than seeing proprietary products show up on a foreign market before product launch and at a fraction of your price. But cyber attacks are not monolithic. Different cyber actors have different capabilities and different goals when conducting operations in cyberspace. Iran and North Korea aren't as capable as China, but have proven to be unpredictable and aggressive actors who aren't hesitating to take offensive cyber operations against private entities. In 2014, we saw for the first time destructive cyber attacks carried out on US soil by nation-state entities. In February, actors in Iran attacked the Las Vegas Sands Casino, and in November, North Korea attacked Sony. So the threats are becoming more aggressive and more public. If there's any good news in this, it's this. Very little of what China, North Korea, Iran, and the vast majority of cyber criminals and self-proclaimed hacktivists do is very sophisticated. They largely target vulnerabilities that are easy to guard against or simply to fix. The bad news is that most of us don't do a good job of guarding against those vulnerabilities. So I want to lay out 3 things that we can all do today that will protect us from the vast majority of attacks from the Chinese and elsewhere. This comes directly from our cyber experts at NSA, DHS, and FBI as they translate it for everyone to understand. 1, patch IT software obsessively. Most Chinese cyber intrusions are through well-known vulnerabilities that can be fixed with patches already available. 2, segment your data. A single breach shouldn't give attackers access to an entire network infrastructure and a motherlode of proprietary information. If you've seen James Cameron's movie Titanic, and I guess statistically that everyone here has seen it 6 times, you'll remember the forensic reconstruction of the sinking, how the ship had segmented bulkheads so that if the hull was breached, the flooding would stay isolated to just one compartment and the ship would stay afloat. But in the film, the forensic analysis showed that the bulkheads weren't high enough. And so the water spilled over the top of each section into the next until the entire ship was flooded. We tell the private sector, don't let that happen to your data. Make sure a single breach won't sink your entire company, your entire enterprise. And 3, pay attention to the threat bulletins that DHS and FBI put out. This is the easiest and least intrusive way for industry and government to partner on cyber. We're already warning about the intrusions that are taking place against US businesses and advising the private sector about how to protect itself. So please, take these necessary measures and encourage your customers, partners, and contacts to pay attention to those bulletins. And let the FBI know when there is an intrusion or an attack that happens so the FBI can do its part and help. If there's a 4th commandment, it's this: teach folks what spear phishing looks like. So many times, the Chinese and others get access to our systems by pretending to be someone else and then asking for access, and someone just gives it to them. So those are 4 free pieces of advice our cyber professionals are out proselytizing. I'm sure those are things that everybody here already knows, but there's a good reason I'm saying them again, because bad cyber actors are using precisely those avenues to steal our lunch every day. The Chinese in particular are cleaning us out because we know we're supposed to do these simple things, and yet we don't do them. I'll make a small aside here, just because of how my mind works as an engineer. Our companies aren't taking those 4 steps because they think those simple things are either too hard or cost too much money. So let me make this pitch to any budding entrepreneurs in the room. If you can figure out how to make these things cheaper or easier to do, or at least can figure out how to get corporate people at the implementation level to stop thinking these things are impossibly difficult or too expensive, you'll not only help our national security industry, you'll also protect US intellectual property. And if you can figure it out, you can probably create a lucrative startup these days. But again, the threat is not monolithic, and not all of it is simple. Russia, in particular, has a broad range of highly sophisticated technical and human intelligence capabilities. And it's the blending that really makes it potent. Moscow's focus goes beyond just taking advantage of common vulnerabilities that can be fixed with a software patch. And in the event of military conflict or geopolitical crisis with Russia, some US critical infrastructure networks will be at risk. So the Russian cyber threat is much more sophisticated than the others. Taken all together, cyber poses an incredibly complex set of threats because criminals and hacktivist collectives like Anonymous are all thrown together with aggressors like North Korea and Iran, and with Chinese and Russians who could do real damage if they are so inclined. We also see indications that some terrorist organizations are very interested in developing offensive cyber capabilities, and that cyber criminals are selling cyber tools on a growing black market with little regard for what their customers may do with them. Each of those actors has different capabilities and different objectives when they engage in cyberspace, and all of them operate on the same internet. So we're not just looking for a needle in a haystack, we're looking for thousands of needles scattered over acres and acres of haystacks. And the role of the US intelligence community is to put all of those factors into context, and then to give our national leaders the intelligence they need and everything that figures into their calculus to make good decisions about how to defend and how to respond. And we have to do that without oversimplifying the situation and while acknowledging the things we don't know. Despite what some may think, the intelligence community does not have an all-seeing eye or a crystal ball. We are not omniscient. A closed society like North Korea is a really hard target. And they're just one small piece of the cyber threat puzzle. So knowing that cyber threat has topped our worldwide threat assessment for 3 years running, and with all that context about how hard the cyber problem is, 2 months ago, the President directed D&I Clapper to establish the Cyber Threat Intelligence Integration Center. That is CTIIC, which we pronounce CTIC despite the double I. It's got 2 I's because intelligence integration is the entire point. In the 2 months since the President directed the D&I to stand up the center, the #1 question we hear is, isn't this new center just duplicating the work of other centers? The short answer is no. When you look deeper, you see that each has a unique mission and focus area. DHS's center is responsible for incident prevention, mitigation, and recovery for all of the government's unclassified networks and improving the private sector's ability to secure networks and respond to incidents. This includes the full span of our nation's critical infrastructure and the assets that are vital for our society and our economy to function. The FBI's Cyber Center supports foreign and domestic investigations of cyber incidents targeting US citizens and companies. I'm using incident pretty broadly here because there are so many different types of criminal activities involving computers and the internet. DoD's centers work to secure the department's networks and improve the security of the defense industrial base, a highly critical mission given the information on these networks that is so vital to our national security. There are a variety of other federal entities, law enforcement, intelligence, sector-specific agencies like Treasury and Energy that work other parts of the cyber problem. Every day, each of these centers and entities gets better and better at what they are charged to do, individually. We're at that point now in our collective maturity where it's time to knit together all these separate activities. That's where CTIC comes in. CTIC will be a wheel hub, an entity that could bring in intelligence and, critically, information on vulnerability and impacts, bringing together everything the intelligence community knows about a threat or an event, and push it back out to the people who need to act on it. CTIC will sort through all the threat reporting and make sense of it, determine what needs to be shared and to whom, which includes translating the jargon from each sector or agency into something people can understand. Today, and for good reasons, Our message to industry often boils down to be very afraid. And our message to the national security community can be read as, if you touch the internet, you are at risk. We need to do better at telling people what to be afraid of, or of presenting that in a way that helps them determine what to do about it, beyond the 4 simple pieces of advice that I laid out earlier. It reminds me a lot of those first years after 9/11, when there was constant reporting or chatter about another wave of attacks. It was something to fear, but not specific enough to be dramatically useful. In cyber, our assessments up till now have included reporting on what's happening and some capability assessment. We've looked at answering what a specific piece of malware can do or what a specific adversary system can do, along with what tools any specific actor has, reflecting the deep expertise and specific mission that each agency or sector faces. What it does not provide is a holistic picture. For instance, one piece that's been missing, a piece that needs an integrated picture to understand, is intent. We know when an adversary can do something, but will they? How will Putin use the enormous cyber capabilities that Russia has developed? What conditions would have to be present to trigger that happening? How can we prevent that from happening or be ready to respond? CTIC will be that center hub, providing mutual situational awareness and enabling the centers and experts in the community to do their jobs better. That means the FBI and DHS will continue to be the liaison points to serve U.S. industry. I believe the lessons we've learned from counterterrorism, remember, CT was the impetus for the ODNI's creation, will be useful in addressing this cyber problem, even as I know that cyber is a much harder problem. It's more diffuse, and it touches nearly every sector of national industry and our government, not to mention private citizens. In counterterrorism, we needed to identify an actor with capability, access, and intent. It was and is hard, but we're dealing with discrete entities. An actor is a person. A capability involves something discrete, a weapon or a bomb. And access occurs in physical space, a building with vulnerabilities that can be known. In cyber, our actor is code buried in a few packets among billions, launched by organizations that range from cyber criminals to hacktivists to nation states. In cyberspace, access and target vulnerabilities are often not well known or even fully knowable. Target vulnerabilities are virtual and stretch from your device across a network and into the vastness of the internet. The guardians of these networks work to lock them down and protect them, but they often surprise themselves because the systems they are guarding are not fixed entities like buildings, but are dynamic and constantly evolving. They are also subject to things like unwitting insiders who create vulnerability by something as simple as opening an email attachment. However, we can leverage the lessons we've learned in counterterrorism about the value of an integrated intelligence picture, the ability to track threats over time, to understand their significance, and begin to anticipate their actions by understanding their intent, to push actionable warning and disseminate as much information as possible consistent with the need to protect intelligence sources and privacy concerns. One of the bigger lessons that we learned from the formation of the National Counterterrorism Center is to not over-engineer CTIC. The way it's structured and the way it addresses its mission is going to be fluid. And that makes sense because, as we discussed, the internet and cyberspace are fluid. And cyber is tougher and newer than terrorism. When Sony was attacked in November, it took us a little while to piece together the details of what happened. Compare that with what happened last month, March 24th, when tragically Germanwings Flight 9525 crashed. Within hours, the counterterrorism community had filled in much of the picture. By the next morning, when the president got his book, he could read that we asserted with confidence that it was not likely to be a terrorism event. That happened because the CT community is very integrated. All the players are talking to each other, and we have a coordinating hub in NCTC. And they have the muscle memory to know what questions to ask and where the expertise and the data are. In the CT arena, we figured out intel sharing and pushing intel where it needs to go. Cyber is our next big challenge. We're still working out the details of what CTIC will look like, but we're planning to staff it with about 50 people, which doesn't sound like a lot. But remember that the National Intelligence Council and the President's Daily Brief similarly count their staff in the dozens. And we're just creating the Will Hub here, leveraging the work of all that expertise across the intelligence community. Those 50 people will include experts from FBI and DHS who can facilitate information sharing when it's relevant. And we know that having those experts will be a critical building blocks for growing this capability. For me, it's another area that I never thought that I would get into, another thing that I never thought that I would be doing. But as my first boss at CIA promised, I'm involved in critical work, and I unfortunately have no reason to be bored. So thank you for listening this morning, for supporting this conference, and to all of you who are considering a career in public service.